everyone. The channel's name is Education for All, and today's lecture is about organizational behavior. So please bear in mind this is the first lecture, and so let's start. Organizational behavior, whether you write it with a Z or whether you write it with an S, it is a study of human behavior in organizational settings, the interface between human behavior and the organization itself. Organizational behavior describes how people interact with one another inside of an organization, such as a business. These interactions subsequently influence how the organization itself behaves and how well it performs. For businesses, the organizational behavior is used to streamline efficiency, improve productivity, and spark innovation to give firms a competitive edge. Elements of organizational behavior are sense-making, people, structure, technology, and external environment. Organizational behavior is a very vast field, and today we will talk about the first and the most important element of organizational behavior, that is sense making. This is the outline for sense making, and let's move towards the next slide. Sense making is underpinned by both cognitive and social processes. That means it is the ability to interpret and respond appropriately in a given situation. The key characteristics of sense making are a dynamic and ongoing process of organizing environmental cues in order to interpret the environment around us. Second, it is retrospective because an individual makes sense of the situation as events are lapsing and they are constantly reviewing the sense made as new cues pop up. Next, it is plausible. In other words, individual never make perfect sense, but a good enough sense to understand the surroundings. The last one, it is a social process in a sense that plausible stories are created, retained, and shared with others. Now let's move towards the next slide. Sense making becomes salient when individuals are confronted with unexpected or surprising situations. Ambiguous events that interrupt our ongoing activities, like a strategic change, like a new policy implementation. Some of these events can seriously affect our sense making. For example, a brutal audit. It is a test of ability to react appropriately to crisis situations. Now, cue and frame. Let's have a look at that. Individuals have a frame of the situation in mind when they are extracting cues. Sense making is about connecting the extracted cues. Here it is connecting the cues and frames to create sense, to create meaning of something. That is to develop mental models. Sense making is one of the key processes that enables individuals to perform a valid mental model of the given situation, allow them to react appropriately. Now let's move towards the next slide. Three premises of sense making, and sense making as a social process. Even when we make sense on our own, we are embedded with the wider social context which influences our thoughts, emotions, and actions. I hope you're getting the point. Key concepts that explain how shared mental models are achieved. There are four processes. Sorry, there are four concepts. Number one is situational awareness, the ability to identify, process, or even interpret and comprehend environmental cues. Second, heedful interrelating, the ability to show sensitivity to cues sent by others, awareness and individuals are interdependent in their actions. Number three, collective mindfulness and mindful organizing. This is one of the most important part of sense making. A rich awareness of discriminatory detail and the capacity for action that facilitates detection of errors and correction. This is like how if you have made an error, you have to, get off the top of your head and you need to know what exactly went wrong, and you would not repeat that mistake again. Collective mind, shared mental models that are essential for effective coordinated intelligent action. Let's move towards the next slide. Strategies for developing shared mental models by Maryland and Gilson. Okay, the first strategy is contextualization. It means the development of common understanding based on a previous experience. So that means previously I made that mistake, I will not make it again. Number second, sorry, action. Development of common understanding based on active involvement and interaction amongst team members. So there comes the difference. A team is involved, several thoughts, and one decision. Triangulation. Triangulation is development of common understanding using different sources of information. That might be primary, that might be secondary, that might be tertiary. Deliberation. Deliberation is convergence of information to formulate meaning, like the way light is converged. Affiliation. Individuals compare their own mental models in order to arrive at a mutually acceptable shared mental model. It means a mutual consensus. Now let's go towards the next slide. These are the common biases and errors while in sense making. Fundamental attribution error. When we think something has done wrong, we interpret the cues in the way and we blame them for inappropriate action, not the wider environment. For example, they are late because they don't care about us and not because they might have been caught in a traffic jam. So if something has happened in the past, we got to know that the same thing will repeat. No, that's wrong. Okay, now self-serving bias. Interpretation of cues in a way that successes are down to us and failures are down to others. Like successes are because of me and failures are because of him. This is what self-serving bias means. Selective perception. Perception is selective processing, the interpretation of the cues that is consistent with one's values, beliefs, and attitudes. For example, we discount the cues that do not fit into a narrative. So I hope sense making session is very interesting. Let's move towards the next slide. Consequences of ineffective sense. When mental models are not valid or not shared, the sense making will be ineffective and it might collapse. The consequences of this will be based on type of situation or context. For example, minor errors and mistakes with everyday activities, suboptimal decisions, misunderstanding between team members which slows down the teamwork, minor accidents, minor mishaps, disasters and accidents with several severe consequences. Now let's go to the next slide. Now let's see an example where sense making failed. The example is of Bhopal gas leakage disaster, where a terrifying, uncontrollable exothermic reaction of a toxic gas had been exploded in a MIC production facility that had been shut down 6 weeks earlier. Although the plant had made many safety and technology related problems, that is, a queue could mean anything. Alert operators could have detected these problems on time. These were the cues which are available to the employees to prevent disaster. It includes smell of a toxic gas. I mean, that would have rang the bells in the mind that something is wrong. Increase in the air pressure. That would have also acted as a cue. Employees would have felt increase in the air pressure. Liquid boiling and turning into a gas in the tank. and a bubble of brownish water coming out of the tank. Okay, that is one of the most important signs. Likely the frame and the operators had in their mind. The plant was shut down, the installation were turned off, and nothing wrong can happen here. This was what was in their mind. The above cues were integrated onto this frame inappropriately, leading to the development of invalid mental model and consequently a collapse of sense making occurred. Now this is another example. Uh, If you know the loss of AF447, the flight, the factors that contributed were time of the flight and not the diverting to around the storm. I mean, they went in the storm rather than moving away from it. And there were signs of unease on behalf of Bonin. The captain taking a break just before they hit the storm. Okay, that is disturbing. Tubes clogging with ice. Okay, this is also another disturbing factor. A casual handover to the second of the pilot. Mild mismanagement in control and authority structure. Lack of pilot preparedness for manual flying at high altitudes. Usually, pilot put the flight on autopilot when they fly at high altitudes, but there was no preparedness in this case of flying manually, and that is one of the reason that the loss occurred. One of the most important factor was stall warning, which was also ignored there. Now let's do a brutal audit of failure of sense making here. The autopilot disconnected and they had to fly manually. This was what could have happened. The cues that were available to prevent the disaster. Stall warning, as I told you, the speed readings were uneven, a message that flight law has changed from normal to alternate, and dual input oral and visual warning. You see, they were going towards the storm. Likely frame the pilots had in their mind. The Airbus cannot stall. The cues were not interpreted correctly. Some cues were ignored, such as stall warning, because they couldn't fit in their frame. So now let's have a look at the wider implications of such extreme cases. Many organizations operate based on a set of routines taken for granted and assumptions. Over-reliance on these may erode the sense-making capabilities. What could be done now? Continuous hands-on exposure on how systems work, simulation of unusual conditions that test individual and team sense-making capabilities in safe environment, encouraging and embedding an ongoing problem-solving and interrogation into job routines and processes. Sense-making is a key to effective teamwork. How? Developing situational awareness to understand what is going on around you, heedful interrelating for appropriate exchange of cues and information, mindful organizing to prevent and detect errors on time, and develop shared mental models for coordinated action. Summary: sense making underpins all processes of effective organization. Sense making is the foundation of effective decision making, collective action. Ineffective sense making is likely to cause all sorts of problems and issues with everyday options. If it breaks down completely, particularly in safety and critical environments, it may lead to disastrous consequences like the Bhopal incident, like the AF447 incident. These are all extreme cases, but that is why it is useful as shocking reminder of the process that we most of the time take for granted. Yeah, so that's all from the presentation today, and hope you've enjoyed it. And see you next time. Bye bye.